Welcome to the #1 show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Everybody, welcome back to the show. And our guest today actually was in our top 5 most listened to episodes of 2022. And I think actually to date, his episode was number 3, and that's Joseph Hyland Authement. You know, Joseph first came on the show when we did Deal Rip Live, which I'm hoping to get back to doing. We don't have enough deals coming in, but essentially where capital sales reps and even implant reps submitted deals anonymously so that we can essentially rip them live. If you're interested in submitting, you can go to dealrip.com to submit your case there, and hopefully, we get some more submissions. We'll try and do one soon. And so Joseph came on, and his episode I think was so powerful and very much listened to, because a lot of people in capital sales don't actually have a source of truth to go to think about how do you manage deals, how do you put together a strategy. And post Deal Rip Live in his episode, Joseph and I were talking, and he made a good point, which was a lot of the times capital sales reps aren't successful, not necessarily because they're not good enough or because they're not capable. A lot of it's because they have a manager who doesn't know how to manage to the success that they want to see, to more specifically, to manage to the outcomes that they want. Right. And so I had him back on, and in this episode, we cover his framework around how he essentially works with a rep to identify, analyze, and develop a plan so that they can close more deals, and more importantly, coach the rep. I think something to point out here is that, sales in our industry is very obscure in the sense that you can have somebody who's a phenomenal sales rep, an amazing lone wolf individual contributor. And a lot of times companies make the mistake of promoting that kind of rep to a manager position, and they fail. And this is okay, because even in the world of sports, we see this. Look, Magic Johnson is arguably one of the greatest basketball players of all time. He's definitely in the top 5. He was a head coach for literally 6 months because he was just not good at it. And so in this episode, we go through Joseph's process on how does he work with the rep, and specifically the framework that he uses to develop reps into high caliber, high output, high results oriented capital sales leaders. Now, with that being said, let me give a quick shout out and plug for my partner, Clary. Clary is a software company that's specifically focused on how do you close more deals, right? And a lot of this starts with better data. Now, when we think about data, we think of Salesforce. And a lot of us invested in Salesforce expecting it to be one thing, but in fact, it's not. Let's face it, not a single rep on planet Earth, at least in our industry, ever said, yeah, I closed more deals this year because of Salesforce, right? Well, there's a reason why they don't say that. And the main reason is that, look, for that to happen, you have to have good, clean data entered into your CRM. And look, entering data into your CRM is a time suck, right? A lot of data doesn't even actually make it there. This leaves the sales reps lacking the information they need to close deals, and sales leaders without the information they need to actually run the business, so that whenever it happens, whether it's every month or every quarter, when you do a deal review, people are reporting the news instead of reporting on fact and data. So Clary is the leader in revenue operations and intelligence, and they've developed a category around revenue collaboration and governance, right? The idea is, what's the cadence? What is the approach? What is the strategy needed so that you can leverage and grow your revenue, of course, by managing the pipeline in a more effective way? So you may actually be leaving more revenue than you expect on the data. And the only way you're going to be able to manage a pipeline, increase sales acceleration through that pipeline, and close more deals is through better data, cleaner data, and in a way that is not going to slow down your reps. So go to clary.com, CLARI.com, or if you want to help me out, because they're a great partner of the show and I like to show results myself, click the link below found in the show notes. Go schedule a demo with Clary just to learn about their platform. Even if it's not the right time for you, I've talked to them and they love doing these analysis and demos with companies because they end up teaching a lot and they like to position themselves as the experts when it comes to revenue collaboration and governance. So go check out Clary. And lastly, if you're a sales rep or sales leader and you've realized, hey, we can't sell the way we used to sell. You can't show up to the hospital anymore. Selling is more difficult than ever in this industry. That's why leveraging social media, specifically LinkedIn, to drive network effects as a team to increase your sales pipeline and close deals at scale is more important than ever. So if you're interested in learning how to do that, whether you're a rep or a manager, head over to my website, khateebandco.com, and click webinars and watch my webinar on how to do this. In that webinar, I give you access to my online course, community, and weekly coaching calls where we talk about all things digital medical sales and how do you leverage social media so that you can do more with less. So go to khateebandco.com or check in the show notes below. I have a link directly to that webinar. Watch the webinar. You're going to learn a lot about how to implement the same tactics and strategies I implemented in my career to essentially pack pipeline and close deals, right? Plus, you'll be able to directly purchase my course at a discounted price. That's right. For those who are willing to watch that webinar, I want to incentivize that behavior. Those are the people who are motivated. Those are the people who get the best results in my program. Just recently, a rep who went through my program started implementing some of these tactics online in terms of growing their network, engaging customers, and then posting a few posts just on, clinical papers, some customer success posts, told me that a surgeon reached out interested in their products. They had seen some of these content coming from him online on LinkedIn, tried the product and actually increased utilization. So they converted and increased utilization on a surgeon. And that happened in 2 weeks. Not every case is like that, but let me tell you, there's money on the table right now, my friends. All your competitors are doing the same way of spam emailing and showing up in person. You can go directly to where your customers and prospective customers are having a conversation online on LinkedIn, and I show you how to do that at scale. So go check that out in the show notes below or go to my website, khateebandco.com. Now, with that being said, let's get on to our show. Here is our episode with Joseph Hyland Authement. What's up, everybody, and a big welcome and hello to the Red Hat Gang. As always, I've been loving your guys' engagement on All Hail Medical Sales. I've gotten a lot of requests from you guys to have Joseph Hyland Authement back. His episode from last year is easily, I know it's top 5. I think depending on the platform, it's either number 3 or number 2. And so here he is, the man, the myth, the legend. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. And, I saw that after the show, like you've been making the podcast circuits. You were on the Medical Sales Accelerator. Those guys are awesome. Zed and Clark doing an amazing job. Have you been on any other shows?
No, it was just that one since the last time we got together. But what was interesting about that was that I did not know this going into it, but we get onto the podcast and Clark says, "Hey, I know your wife really well." And so I said, "Oh my gosh, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I live like right down the street from you." And so,
oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
It's funny to put that connection together.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I actually did like a sort of an entrepreneur mastermind with 2 of them, and then Ali Schwenke of Simple Strat in Louisiana last year, and we've been talking about doing it again. So, like, if I'm in your neck of the woods, we're definitely cigars and some Cajun food for sure. For sure.
It sounds terrible. Sounds like nothing I ever partake in.
Terrible, absolutely terrible. Well, speaking of things that people don't partake in, let's talk about sales coaching. Look, did you see that segue? That was just so smooth. Where are you going to get that? That was so good. Yeah. These other, I got to say, like, quick sidebar is like these other MedTech podcasts, a lot of them are good. But some of them are just so buttoned up and formal. I'm just like, man, can we crack a joke around here, guys? Can we just like loosen up a little bit? Have a little fun. The hosts are just like, oh, we're gonna cut that out. That's not very professional. I'm like, that's what the people want, especially this audience. For this episode, that's what they're gonna want. So
I think you promised me bourbon on this episode the last time we were on it. So I'm all about it.
I know. No, seriously. I'm very open to that. The 2 problems. Number 1 is like I've been very good the last year or 2. I think because I'm getting older and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to have a drink every single week, and I'm going to do it like every so often. So I drink on rare occasions, special occasions. The other thing is that, like, man, I have a drink or two of me. Great conversation. I don't know about podcast wise, because I had a VC on like 2 years ago. He still thinks it's like the best podcast he's ever done. Me, when I listen to that, I'm just like, towards the end of like the first hour, I'm just like slurring my words. I'm like, oh, did not go over well. But like, maybe I'm being a little too hard on myself. I don't know.
Well, we'll
So
see. You do a good job, man. So I'm ready.
I appreciate it. So look, I'll introduce a topic. We talked about this before, and specifically coming out of Deal Rip Live, which is, a lot of reps don't know how to look at deals. They don't know how to present. They don't know how to do a lot of things, which, if you think about it, is normal, because your average rep is just, there's only a top 1% of sales professionals who are hell-bent on getting better. They'll study, they'll analyze all these things. Most people, they need a coach. I mean, even Michael Jordan needed a coach. The problem is that most sales managers don't know how to coach. I think a lot of times you have somebody who won multiple President's Clubs, gets promoted into management, and they're a terrible manager. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe you told me this or someone else did, that, Magic Johnson was like, one of the top NBA players of all time. He lasted like 6 months as a coach, because it's Magic Johnson. And I think a lot of sales managers are like that, because their approach to coaching is just like, oh, you just got to work harder and you just got to get better. But you have a very specific, like, 5-step approach to how you coach somebody. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what I call it is, it's the 5-step coaching process, or coaching methodology, if you will. And essentially the way that I look at it, Omar, is that, you have to start with the end in mind. So you've got to talk about what it is that you're going to coach to. What are the areas of development that the person that you're going to be working with, developing along the way, really needs to work toward. And then you need to find a way to go observe them doing those tasks that you're working on, trying to develop. Once you've done that, then you need to give some immediate feedback, some very specific immediate feedback. And in the areas where they don't know how to do something really well, you need to show them what good looks like. You need to be an expert yourself, or as close to it as possible, so that you can train them in the appropriate manner. And then it's sort of a rinsing and repeating after that, where maybe you're going even deeper into that particular task or topic, or maybe you're starting over with a new task or topic. And so it's sort of this cycle, if you will, right? This virtuous cycle that, in my opinion, should never really end. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a coach. I am fortunate that I've got a number of people that I consider coaches and mentors that are constantly, telling me all the areas where I need to improve, and then showing me what good looks like, and helping me to hone my craft. I think we talked today. I'm going to be taking your course. To me, that is coaching right there. How can I get better at the things that you're an expert in? You're going to show me how to do it. I'm going to go out and do it, and probably come back to you with some questions about how I refine that. So, yeah, it's something that I've really bought into. And we talked a little bit about this on my first podcast with you, but I am that exact person that you just mentioned. I was a top rep and was thrust into management after never having any experience with that. And my first year in management, I failed miserably. I mean, I don't even know why the company kept me, quite frankly. I don't know. I don't know.
Intuitive?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Was this
So?
I'm just curious, at what point, because I think it was Kim Black who like nearly fired you. Was that when you were a rep, or when you became a manager?
No, that was when I was a rep. So there were multiple times when they looked to try to fire me.
I mean, this is probably why we get along so well, because there was, back when I was at Missouri, there was a period where both Chris Sells and Chris Prentice were like so pissed they would have fired me. But luckily the space between those times was just far enough, like a week apart, that I didn't. But had it overlapped, like that would have been the end of my medical career, and I don't think I'd be sitting here today.
Well, exactly. And I think what it comes down to is, look, it's great to have the process, and I definitely think it's a worthwhile topic. But the starting point, if you will, is trust. And so without trust, you can give somebody all the coaching and development and feedback, but if they don't trust you or you don't trust them, you're going to have a really difficult time making any progress. And maybe we'll get into this, maybe we won't, but there are some seminal moments in my career. One person in particular that essentially told me, hey, look, like, nobody wants to work with you. You're self-centered, you're selfish, you're all about one person, and that's Joseph Authement. And so if you want to be a good leader of people, the first thing is you've got to put more into them than you put into yourself in terms of time and energy. And you've really got to be introspective about wanting to help others instead of just helping yourself. So sort of the baseline expectation is before you can be a good coach, you've got to show that you actually care about the people that you're coaching.
I know. I wholeheartedly agree. Just something I want to sort of point out. So yeah, I'm excited to work with you and your team over at Echo. I think that something I needed to acknowledge and sort of pay some respect to is the fact that I've been my course and my training and everything. We've been doing it for a little over a year and a half, and you're probably, I think, I hate to say it, I'm not going to make some people happy, but it is what it is. You're the first sales leader who said, yeah, I'd like my team to learn about this, but I'm going to also go through it myself. I think too many times that sales management and leaders in our industry use the fact that they're too busy as an excuse not to sort of do the things that their team is expecting to do. And I think this is also the reason why there's this tension between sales and marketing, because there's something that, let's say, the head of sales or VP of sales thinks is important. They don't do it themselves, but then they're expecting their team to do it. And so people are human beings. I mean, having a sales team, it's like having children. If mama and papa aren't doing it, why are the kids going to do it either? So
yeah, I think I don't know. I want to make sure that I don't sound cliche here, but there's this. I saw this this meme the other day that essentially had the difference between a leader and a boss, right? And it showed a number of different pictures that essentially had the leader kind of rowing the boat with the rest of the team, whereas the boss is kind of whipping the people that are rowing the boat. And so it's my opinion that if you want to be a strong leader of people, you have to get in the mix. And that comes back to this coaching process, which essentially requires you to go out and be with your people, observing what they're doing so that you can help them grow and develop. That's the whole premise of it. If you're not willing to do that, I mean, sure, maybe you can do some of it over Zoom in this day and age, maybe. But it really does take that connection between you and the folks that are on your team to really be a great coach, in my opinion.
I completely agree. Before we get into steps, can you just go through sort of name the 5 steps real quick, that way, and we'll kind of go through them in sequence, because there's some things to kind of unpack in each of those.
Yeah. So again, it's, the first step is you have to identify what the areas of development are that you're going to be working toward. That's number one. Number two, you then have to go observe the person, within those areas there that you want to work toward together. You've agreed to them, you've identified them, you've talked about them. So now you're going to go observe them actually doing them. Number three is that you're going to give them immediate feedback on how they've done against that task. And then number four is you may actually have to do it for them. You may have to show them what good looks like before you repeat the process over, right? You then talk about it again, why you did it a certain way. Then you observe them doing it again, and then you give them more feedback. And it's this cycle that you get into that allows repetition and allows for that person to come back at their plan and reviews, on their one-on-ones, whatever that cadence looks like, to say, have I made progress against that or not?
Got it. And then the fifth and final one?
Yeah, is potentially just rinsing and repeating on that same topic if they need more help, or if they need to refine that, or it's choosing the next topic and doing that whole cycle again.
Got it. So let's start with number one. I mean, where do you feel that most managers mess up on that first step?
Well, I'll never forget, back to the whole days of potentially being fired from companies, where I got a reprimand letter on something that apparently I had done as a rep that my manager thought was worthwhile putting in a letter, but they never spoke to me about it. It just was a letter that came to me out of the blue. And so I had no clue that that was actually an issue before the letter came to me. And I thought that it was fairly disingenuous that that manager didn't have the maturity to talk to me about it first. And so I think that communication verbally is super important in all aspects of what we do in life. It's probably where most people run into the most amount of issues in their marriages, right? They're not communicating.
Yeah.
They're not sharing their feelings. They're not talking about the things that each other need to work on. And so, first and foremost, a good leader of people is able to say, okay, these are the things that are going to make us successful in this role. What do you feel comfortable with? What are you really good at? You know, a gap analysis, if you will, or a SWOT analysis. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And what do we need to work on together to get you to the next rung, whether that be President's Club, whether that be into management, whatever that may be. What do we need to hone in on to help you get to your absolute best? Once you're able to go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta ask you about something there. I completely about the gap analysis. What's your take on it? If you do a gap analysis against SWOT, and for those who are not knowing what this SWOT is, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and I forgot the T. What's the T? Time.
Threats.
Or threats. There we go. I keep mixing them up with all these other acronyms that I'm trying to memorize. But when you do that, do you work with a rep to take their strength to a top tier world class 0.1% performer, or do you spend time on their weaknesses? How do you balance that out?
Yeah, so for what it's worth, we've talked about reps here for a little bit, but this could be for new managers, this could be for directors, this could be for vice presidents, this could be for others within the C-suite or the executive team, right? This is something that is really able to be used across really any title within an organization. And so I would say that really it depends. It depends, and I think you definitely have to, especially in today's age, you have to be a little bit careful. You don't want people to be in a scenario where they feel like they're being beat up. There's a lot of people who are very sensitive in today's age, so you got to be really careful of that.
That is true.
You certainly want to talk about all of the strengths that they have, which is a good thing. But I do think that a really good leader, if he builds the trust and the rapport with his folks, can talk about some of the areas of weakness. And that's not a bad thing. We all have weaknesses. We're human, after all. That is an okay thing. So it's a balancing act for sure, and it's something you have to be really careful about. You don't want to come across as though you're attacking the person's integrity. Mm-hmm. This sort of goes back to the deal rip that we did. It's not about the person themselves. It's about them as a professional. And so what are their professional weaknesses that are hindering them from being able to move to the next level? And what are all the strengths that you can pull from to help to balance the scales?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think I know this is where it's tough. And I'm wondering again, maybe on the manager side, even so, on at least in marketing, when you assess somebody from a marketing standpoint, there could be a variety of things you look at. Let's say there's copywriting, paid ads, organic, all these different things. A lot of times, if somebody's bad at something, we say, okay, don't focus on that. Focus on the things that you're actually really, really good at. And then that's where you become really focused as a marketer, and you kind of, it's called a T-shaped marketer. So you have the top of the T is all these skills that you're pretty good at, but that one part of the T where it goes deep, that's something you're really good at. right? So for me, that deep T was paid ads and like live events, things that I'm not good at, like SEO, Google ad, like terrible at that. And that's not good. For sales though, especially as a rep, like it's kind of like you can't be bad at presenting and be like phenomenal at prospecting. Like you have to be well-rounded on all these things. And I'm wondering, like, how do you decide? Like, I'll give you a scenario, or maybe you can give me a scenario. Have you ever seen it where you've done the gap analysis and the rep is not good at more than one thing? Do you choose to work on one thing at a time per quarter? Do you say we got to triage all of it? How do you decide? Because I think this is where the thought process a lot of managers abandon, because it takes time to think these things through, and it's so much easier to just be like, just work harder,
Yeah. Working harder is a zero sum game. There's only 24 hours in a day. There's only 7 days in a week. I think that it comes down to, again, the leader has got to know their business. They've got to know what the triggers are that are going to move that business unit forward. What are the most important things that, for example, a sales rep needs in order to move a deal forward? And so if presenting is a weakness of theirs, and I can tell you, there's one person in particular that I can remember like it was yesterday, went on to be like a 4 or 5 times President's Club winner, but had never been in a C-suite and presented to executives before. And so in the week leading up to this particular meeting that I can remember, that individual said, "Hey, I've never presented to executives before, and I'm really concerned about it." And we did some role plays. I knew that it was going to be super important for us to close that deal. And so we went over it and over it and over it and over it again. And the day of the presentation came and he said, "I can't bring myself to do it. There's so much riding on the line here that I just can't bring myself to doing it." And what that told me was as that person's mentor and leader, I hadn't done my job appropriately. And so what I did was I sort of mixed up that coaching process a little bit. I started with, "Hey, we're going to talk about it. We're going to try to train to it best that we can and get him comfortable." But then I was the one that did it first. So he observed me doing it first and saw what good looked like. And then we talked about it. And then I found a way for him to then give that next executive presentation. And we worked on that for probably 6 months, Omar, because it was so important to that aspect of the business. He was great at building clinical support. He was great at, compelling physicians to get into a C-suite, but he would freeze up when he would get in front of executives.
Got it. I know. And that's, I think it's really interesting. And I think an important point to note, which is sometimes people demand a certain level of standard, which I'm all about that. But I think they don't do their team any justice or service by not showing them what good looks like, So after that first step, what's our second step? And can you repeat step number 1? I'm trying to come up with an abbreviation or acronym. There's one thing that medical school helped me with is coming up with really good mnemonic devices. So step 1 is you talk about the area of development, and that's where you do the SWOT analysis. Okay.
Yeah. You talk to them about what do you think you're missing on? Why aren't you moving the ball forward? And then the second step.
End of this interview, I'm gonna have a great mnemonic.
I can't wait to hear it.
I can't wait to come up with it, man. All right, second step.
So the second step is then, and you could kind of mix and match these if you will, but
no, don't do that. Now you're messing up the mnemonic now at this point.
All right, perfect. Well, the second step is that once you talk about what it is that they need development on, then you've got to get out and you've got to go observe them. You've got to observe them either in the field or on Zoom, actually doing the task. So in this case, let's go back to that story about the rep that I was working with. We talked about it all week long, and the idea was that I was going to observe him giving the executive presentation. Well, he couldn't do it. he didn't feel like he had what it took to be able to give that.
Do you feel, how long ago was this that this happened?
This was probably 2019, maybe.
Okay. So long enough that I can poke and pry about this. Do you feel that this rep was genuinely like they were just not prepared, or they felt more vulnerable because you were going to be in the room?
I think it's a combination of the two. I also think that it's a situation where he had never been in that arena before, and it was brand new to him. There was a lot on the line, and so that's the other aspect of this that I think is important. Is that as a good people leader, you need to know sort of how much rope to give them. What you don't want is you don't want them to hang themselves, but you do want, you mentioned like raising kids. We both have kids. I'm a lot older than you are, and so are my kids. But you have to let people fail and fail fast. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if it's everything on the line type of a situation like this was, we didn't really have a lot of room for failure. And so I had to make the decision as the leader that he brought up a good point, and I couldn't allow him to be in a situation where he potentially failed and put the deal at risk. It was that important. So that's why you also have to be flexible with this model. And maybe you don't observe them first. Maybe you're the one that's showing them what good looks like first.
Yeah. Well, and I think you made the right. I know you made the right call, and I would have made the same call myself, because putting aside that you guys needed that deal, the other side of it is that if this is their first one and it fails in a way that it's like really, really painful, that's going to be in the back of that rep's mind, all constantly moving. It's really hard to dig out of that. I hate using sports analogies and everything, but like when it comes to sales, I see sales very much like a sport. I see the people in it very much like athletes. And so there's a way of like developing the psyche of that athlete, of that rep. And if you put him in that position, it's just like, it's hard to come back from that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I like sports analogies as well. I mean, I think that
I was like, that's why we get along. Sports analogies, exactly. Cigars.
I probably have a little bit more bourbon than you do, but that's okay too.
That's okay. I'm willing to be mentored and coached. I'm willing to be mentored and coached on that. Actually, can we apply this 5-step coaching program to me and developing my taste for bourbon?
All you need to do is move to New Orleans and it'll just come to you naturally.
I love it. Sorry, you were going to say.
No, I was just going to say, I think a good sports analogy is where you were going with, the basketball analogy. It's like this. It would be hard for me to imagine that you could take a really great recruit and teach them how to improve their shooting game if you had not done it before. But it doesn't really matter if you were LeBron James. It just matters that you had done it before. You had some idea of what good looked like.
I agree. And I'll share a perspective. And again, this is my show, but this is your episode, so you can disagree with me on this. I would love for you to. Most recently, not to go on a tangent, but that's what the show's about. Recently, there's a friend of mine. We're kind of going through venture capital, right? So he's getting into VC. I've done a little bit of investing, and I'm trying to learn more about it, right? And we were talking about it. And his thing was like, he wanted to go and get operator experience. He's like, he thought that was important. I have a bias, and I believe that's important because I feel like as an investor, if you have operating experience, like you've lived the life, you know what you're doing. However, it's hard to argue with data. And when you look in tech, the investors with the largest outsized returns, none of them are operators. And I think the reason why for that is that when you're an operator, like for me, I was an operator as a head of marketing. My bias is towards like marketing. And so you walk into these deals with that bias versus a non-operator has a bias towards nothing. And so I wonder if there's something there. And I don't know if there's a study on that, like sales leaders who, based on like how long they were in the field as sales reps before going to management, but that would be kind of interesting looking. I'm sure some sales management company did that study. I just have to find it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I just don't think, look, again, I don't think that Tom Brady necessarily will make a great coach. Uh,
Yeah, I
but
agree.
but if you look at Sean Payton, he was a quarterback. He wasn't the greatest quarterback, but he was a quarterback. And so he knew enough to get Drew Brees to where he ended up going. Now,
Hmm.
it's hard to
Do
argue
you?
with the fact that Drew Brees was an amazing physical specimen, and that he had a drive and he had all the things needed to internally to get him to where he needed to be. But that relationship with Peyton was really important, and
Mhm.
I would say that more often than not, your absolute best reps don't immediately make the best coaches or the best leaders because they are self-centered. They are just focused all on themselves, and they only know one way. They don't really fully
Mm.
appreciate situational leadership. And I will tell you,
Interesting.
Omar, as God is my witness, this past week, I had someone that's on my team who I think very highly of come to me and say, I really respect you and I think the world of you and you've done some great things, but not everybody thinks like you. And it was a slap in the face a little bit to wake me up to the fact that I was treating him as though he was me. And that's not good
Mm.
leadership. You've got to be situational. And we had a great discussion about it. And I had to pivot and I had to listen to what his needs were and I had to treat him differently. And that is the beauty of leadership. That's the beauty of coaching. It can't be
Yeah.
about how I do it because I'm not the one that's out there doing what he's doing every day. It's got to work for him.
Yeah, no, I gotta say I think that's a big testament to you that this individual felt comfortable enough to tell you that, because that takes some brass to tell your boss that, and I think that says a lot about you as a leader that they felt comfortable telling you that. You know?
Sure. Well, again, not to sound cliche, but one of my favorite books ever is The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And the base of that pyramid is trust. And if you don't have trust, if you don't establish trust with your actions, not just with your words, you're going to be built on a house of cards and it's going to crumble. And people are going to say, you know what? Thanks for the advice. And they're going to go out and do their own thing.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's also great advice for for raising kids. You
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
By the way, that was sort of a curveball. I thought your favorite book was gonna be like Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah, well, that's up there. I mean, top five.
uh, you know, I'll tell you a random factoid. I only know this because do you know Tim Ferriss?
Of course.
Yeah, so Tim Ferriss was talking about publishing books, and he's like, his during the boom days of like 4 Hour Work Week, he's like, that book crushed. He's like, except every year around Christmas time, there was one book that just beats the living hell out of all other books. I think maybe it still does, and the book is like this children's book. It's like uh, giraffes can't dance in pajamas or something. You know, it's
My
just like
16-year-old is reading Tools for Titans. Loves it.
It's a great book. It's a great book. I have that book. It's yeah, Tim Ferriss is the man. I'll tell you. That guy, I mean, that book is pretty much he just took all his episodes and had somebody format it and just turned it into a book. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think not enough people appreciate how far ahead of his time he was. And it's kind of sad. Like, I think like for a variety of different reasons and timing and everything, Joe Rogan just like really surpassed his podcast. But I think Tim was never interested to have that level of a podcast. But he was so far ahead of a time in terms of how he released books, how he did studies, just a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that guy's the man for sure. Okay, so after that number two step of like observing, right? And by the way, as big as I am about digital, and this I'm going to state this for the record because a very seasoned, tenured, uh, uh, intuitive exec thought, and I had to correct him. I was like, no, I'm not going to mention. I will not say his name. Joseph knows who I'm talking about. Thought that I was very much about like 100% selling digitally and remotely, and I'm not. It's the same thing with coaching and everything else. I'm not 100% about digital and remote. For a lot of these things, you have to go to where you have to physically be there. Like, period, you know?
You do, but you have to be smart enough to be able to come into the new age. I mean, people aren't using rotary phones anymore. They're using, cell phones. They're using Zoom. I mean, you have to be able to come into the new age with your ability to coach. And I think that certainly COVID forced all of us into living in a digital world. And so I'm not against that. I'm not against, being able to give feedback remotely. And look, I have to do that. My team doesn't live in Louisiana, not one of them. Everybody else lives around the globe, and so you have to be able to get good at that as well. And that takes a little bit of doing, because if me and you were together, we would certainly be having a bourbon or a cigar. It's more intimate, but you have to be able to hone your craft to meet whatever venue it is you're in.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And for those who are hearing, I'm so sorry that my son's absolutely losing his mind in the background. But so that number,
he is one. He's allowed to do that.
He is, but sometimes I talk to him. I'm like, listen, guy, you can't keep acting like you're not 6 months old anymore. His mother.
It's a great coaching opportunity, Omar.
Boom with the dagger. I love it. So our second step is that observe step. Okay. What's step number 3?
So step number 3 is that's where you have to then give immediate feedback. You can't be like, the manager I had that sends me an email in the letter, in letter form, or an email, 6 weeks later, whatever, where it's like, I'm not really expecting this feedback to come to me. It's got to be right there in the moment as soon as you observe it.
I gotta just call that out. Like that happened at Intuitive.
I won't say where it happened.
Oh, okay. Well, if it did happen at Intuitive, I will say that's the most unintuitive thing I've ever heard in my life, because Intuitive, it's pretty in your face. But I gotta say, like, I don't know how to say, that is the most like spineless, cowardly, unprofessional. Like that was a BS move, like big time.
Well, big it is. But you'd be shocked at the amount of people that have this is maybe the most difficult step for people, because again,
really?
You do have a lot of sensitive folks out there, and there's look, we've been in the last couple of years where you just have to watch every word, and so this is where I think. Even me, and I've been doing this a little while now, I really have to think about how I'm going to deliver the feedback again, so that it is not personal, so that the person doesn't feel like I'm attacking their integrity. It's got to be about, I saw you in that moment and you said 25 times in your presentation. You need to stop saying and find another filler word. Or you need to slow down and think about what it is that you want to say, so that you don't have a filler. In other words, it's got to be very specific, and it's got to be right there in the moment. Otherwise, all kinds of things can come into play. You can say that a couple of weeks later and they're like, well, I didn't say 25 times, or I don't know what you're talking about, or why didn't you bring that to my attention immediately? And that may be a stupid, example that I'm giving, but
I think it's a good one
on occasion in presentations.
No, I think it's a really good one. I mean, look, I'm a stickler for that kind of thing. I think mainly because like Chris Sells helped me with that a long time ago. But when you speak, and you don't think about this until someone points it out, when you say it's an indicator that you are thinking and you don't know what you're talking about. And especially when you're giving a presentation, there's a huge difference. Like you are much better off stopping and letting like a 2 to 3 second pause go by than go, and so I think it's very, very fair advice. I will say this as an older millennial, who lives in the, world where, like people are sensitive these days. I have this sense, my spidey sense is tingling about the internet, which is the pendulum sort of swung in one direction where it's like, hey, let's be sensitive to people and let's like handle them with soft gloves. And it's swung so far that now it's swinging back. And there's a reason why there's certain personas and characters who are becoming very big on the online, is because there's a thirst and a craving for like realness, for direction, you know? I mean, like, why, like, Jocko Willink? Why is Jocko Willink? You know what's funny? Here's your generation, you're Gen X, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you mind if we take a quick side, quick little small detour from our framework, just to talk something little philosophical? I have this belief that right now, if you look at some of the biggest influencers, people who are really into Joe Rogan, David Goggins, Cameron Hayes, Jocko Willink, you know, there's a list that goes on. All of these people are Gen X. And what is Gen X? I'm really going to piss people off with this. Baby boomers were kind of like your hippie flower child children that just kind of like, you know, let's just like do whatever we want and, you know, blah, blah. And Gen X, for the most part, had to raise itself. And so Gen X, in my personal, like, anecdotal experience, is full of people who literally had to ride the bullet, had to fight for themselves, they had to raise themselves, to do all these things, and really got hardened, right? And the generations that preceded Gen X got a lot softer and whinier, right? And then because of this lack of guidance and everything, and like hardness from the baby boomers, Gen X has gotten to an age where like millennials, Gen Z are just like latching onto that because they have a thirst and craving for that, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's happening. That all being said, now I guess we'll go back to the feedback step. I think you're right that there's a way to do it in a sense where I think you should be hard. Like there's no other way sometimes to get a point across than being hard on somebody, but doing it in a way where they leave saying, yeah, you know what? I know I'm better. I can be better and I will be better, versus feeling like defeated, embarrassed, and humiliated. And then now you just kind of turn them into a loser, you know?
Yeah. Well, there has to be that trust again, and they have to believe that you care about them. You care about seeing them succeed.
How do you do that? How do you do that?
I read a quote. What's that?
Oh, sorry. The quotes of.
Yeah, I read a quote the other day, interestingly enough, and I keep this front and center with my own children. And you can swap the word man for woman in this little quote that I read, and essentially it said that really strong men or women make easy times. Easy times create weak men or women. And, you know, those weak people make difficult times. And, you know, then what do you need to get out of difficult times? You need strong men or women. And so the point behind that is like, I'm raising strong children, men and women, in my household. And I want to do that same thing with team members. I want to have a team that looks to me and says, this person's going to make me stronger, so that when I'm out, you know, tackling whatever it is that I'm out tackling, that I feel strong, that I can go do it, that I can feel confident in myself. And so to me, that's super important, is to build strong-willed people, to build people who believe in themselves. And the only way you do that is by giving feedback, giving constructive criticism. I don't know that I've brought up this person's name before, but Henry Charlton, who is now the GM at Intuitive, he pulled me aside early in my career and said, look, we have to have a difficult discussion. No one on your team wants to work with you. No one. They think you're self-centered. They think you're all about yourself. And if you want to change it, you know, you're going to have to show to those people that you really care more about them than you do about yourself. He gave me a book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And so without him giving me that feedback, which was super difficult to hear. I mean, it was hard to hear, but I trusted Henry. I believed in him. I respected him. And I knew it was coming from a good spot. I will tell you, Omar, that changed the trajectory of my entire career. And it was very difficult feedback for him to give and for me to hear.
Yeah, and but we may not have Joseph Authement today had he not received that feedback, right? And
I
it
can
had to hurt.
guarantee you.
It had to hurt. You know.
What hurt about it was when I came home and asked my wife, "Hey,
Oh,
is this true? Do I act like this?" And she was like, "Yes, you do." Now Henry laughed about it for months after I kind of started to make the course correction that she believed that as well. Not only did he help me in my professional career, but he probably helped me with not getting in arguments with my wife for months and months after that as well.
yeah. It's funny how those things usually go together. But
Yeah.
just before we kind of depart from the step on feedback, every year on his birthday, which is June 22nd, I re-listened to Chris Sells's interview that I had with him. It's the only one. I'm so happy that whatever 2014, 2015, I didn't even have a podcast. I just thought it was a good idea to do. But I recorded that. It's only 25 minutes long, so I re-listened to it. And one of the things that he brought up, is this idea of like, what standard do you hold yourself to? And he talked about like, how do you start your day? He's like, do you just get out of bed and just throw your clothes on and jump in the car and turn on the radio and just kind of get to where you're going and just sort of deal with things as they come? Or do you have a plan? Do you get your brochures? Do you do this? And I think it's a lot of this has to do with extreme ownership and discipline behind the intention that you're going to bring to your work that day, And I think it's the same thing with feedback. Because again, I'm gonna be kind of sexist here for a second. I think if you were to, just taking, men and women, putting them in leadership positions, I think men have a tendency to be a lot more overly aggressive about things because it's just natural. Yeah, like when I see a guy, and again, I'm talking about this because I'm a man. I can't talk about what it's like to be a woman, but when I see other men, like a guy getting angry and yelling at people, all I see is like he's doing the easiest, least resistance path, right? Versus it takes a lot more time and effort to calm down and to actually think, okay, when I'm going to give this person feedback, what are the exact words that I'm going to use so that that communication goes into their brain and seeds itself so that something blossoms versus if I say it, this is the thing that people I don't think don't realize. And by the way, I'm going to use women as well. That if you say something with the wrong tone, the wrong words, a lot of times you're going to bring up like old haunts from somebody's past, maybe a parent that they hate and a spouse or something, and you're never going to get across from them and you lose that moment, and now every time you communicate with that person, you're just another version of their shitty ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or their father that they hate or something,
Yep. Well, and
Um,
that's also why it's super important to at least have a video communication, at best live in person when you're giving the feedback, because you know as well as I do, text, email, Slack, uh,
oh,
whatever
yeah.
else, it has no tone. There's no way of really understanding, you know, what the other person is trying to express. And I will tell you that has been my mentors have had to work on sort of my ability to not just say what I'm thinking and it come out of my mouth. My mentors and coaches have worked really hard on ensuring that I'm putting a filter between my brain and my mouth. And you're right, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, but you're talking to another person who does have emotions and feelings. And so you do have to be thoughtful about the feedback. And the way that I would say it is, it's pretty simple. You've got to use the golden rule. How would I want somebody else to give me this feedback? And I think if you look at it that way, and if you put it in that context, everything else gets to be pretty easy.
Absolutely. Now that being said, and again, I'm spending time on here because I think it is a really important step. That being said, because I worked for what was it, almost 5 years, 4 years in Silicon Valley, where it was too thoughtful, too soft, and I don't know. I really have a strong belief in the psychology of like the natural world. If you look at the natural world, I feel like maybe you and I talked about this at one point Or like in the natural world, if a mother bear is with her cubs and the cubs are doing something that are going to threaten their life, at some point she has no other recourse but to like bite at the cubs so they learn their lesson. Don't do that. And so same thing with feedback. I think again, don't go overboard, but at some point, like you have to be stern with somebody. I'm gonna use a great example because it took me many, many years to figure out how to do this. And I will admit, I'm very proud of myself. But like, I won't say his name, but like, people can probably figure it out. My creative director for this show, super talented guy, very sharp, right? He is like, and he's not an employee, by the way. He's got his own business. He's my number one expense for this business because I really invest a lot in this show. There's some things that he dropped the ball on, and it happened a few times. And I was not happy. Let's just put that. I was pissed. And after I calmed down, I was like, I need to talk to this guy because he's extremely talented. And if I deliver this the wrong way, he's not going to get better. And I'm gonna make him his own worst enemy. And so I was like, how do I get this guy? So aside from talking pretty sternly to him and kind of like, the two things I did that I felt that were helpful, and I can't think of where I came up with this, was one is I started by saying, hey, I need to talk to you about something. I want to explain a scenario and how we're going to fix it. But I'm just letting you know right now, this is going to hurt, but I need it to be painful because, and that gets their attention. And I was like, because I see a lot of potential and talent in you. And I think you're extremely good at what you do. But if we don't fix this one thing, I'm the only person that might care enough to talk to you like this. Otherwise, you're never going to know this.
Sure.
And fortunately, he turned it around big time. So I don't know if that'll happen every time that way, but
my father always used to tell me, if I didn't care about you, I wouldn't give you this difficult feedback. And I think
that's a good one.
It's tough love 101. So if somebody's not worth investing in, well, everything that we've talked about right now, you should throw it out the window. If they're not willing to accept the feedback, if they don't want to get better, then you're just wasting your time.
That's true.
But if I'm going to give somebody feedback, if I'm going to try to help develop someone, it's because I care about them. I could be doing a million other things, but that should be the most important thing to me if that person is willing to receive it.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't like to overcomplicate these things, but I feel that the best way always to give feedback, and it's more of this is like kind of a psyop, a psychological operation. But there's this thing in psychology and persuasion, which is if you tell somebody who you want them to be, they'll kind of become that, right? So if you go into a negotiation, you tell somebody like, hey, I know you're very like fair and reasonable person. If you kind of repeat that, their actions end up being fair and reasonable. I feel like anytime you give feedback, as hard as it can be, if you kind of keep reminding the person that's like, hey, like A, I'm giving this to you because like I genuinely care about you, but B, it's like I either see potential in you or you're really great, all these things, then I feel like it's more of like taking the person out of the scenario and sort of looking at the problem and saying, hey, here's how we're gonna like fix and improve this, like a skill set, like we're tuning things up. Versus your advice is really good, is like not making it about like the person and their integrity.
Yeah. And if the person that's giving this advice is political or grandstanding or has any sort of ulterior motives, okay, people are going to see right through that. So again, it really comes down to really caring about the people that are on your team. And if you really care about the people that are on your team, then you should be able to give really insightful, thoughtful feedback, and it should be received in that manner. I'm not saying you're always going to do it the absolute right way, but I think that the more genuine you are, the better it will be received.
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of reminds me of that like one saying, which is like, people will forget the things that you tell them. They're never going to forget the way you made them feel, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Before we go to step number 4, I do have one question for you. What is we gotta make this, that was like very deep and philosophical. We need to spice this up a little bit. What is the absolute worst story that you got of the wrong way to give feedback? I got one story. I know you have a lot of them. So what is the worst that you've seen?
Well, why don't you tell yours and then I'll sit here and think about it.
Okay.
Put me on the spot like that, I freeze
I
up.
know.
I'm like, I
I know.
giving
I'm
the
sorry, man.
execution.
Okay. So the very worst that I've seen, it's so bad. Just and I was I was I was a what's the word when there's a drive-by shooting and then there's like bystanders, like collateral damage. I was collateral damage to this, okay? There was a national sales meeting, and prior to the national sales meeting, we reviewed this script with the CEO, okay? And just for so people know, like they don't think it's like recent. This is a long time ago. And at this national sales meeting, we went up and made this like role play demo presentation, and the CEO stood up and not only we started critiquing it, but saying like just really bad mouthing the whole presentation and like, oh, nobody would ever do it like this, or no one would say it that way, like really bad. It was very embarrassing and very uncomfortable. And, you know, that was the day that I was just like, I'm done with this person. Like, and I like really done with them. And what made it worse, because I was part of marketing. He went and apologized to the salesperson who was involved with this. Never talked to me about it ever. And the part that made this all bad, and again, the parts that were bad, doing it like in front of others, like it wasn't like meant to be. Like he could have waited and then afterwards talked to us. Did in front of others, did it in a way that was very belittling. Because like, and I'm a grown, I was a kid back then, but like you're not going to stand up to the CEO of a company in front of a room of people. You're just going to sit there and take it. So like as a guy, like I was boiling. And the worst part about all of this, that script and demo and presentation was approved and made by him. So we had to stand there for like a solid 5-10 minutes while he like just went on about nonsense. And all I can think of was like, you dumb SOB. This is you approved this. This is your script. Like you approved of this. We sent it to you ahead of time and you're like, this looks fine. Go with it. That's the worst that I've ever experienced.
Well, and
What about you?
I guarantee you, Omar, you would never do that. After observing it, you would never do it.
I'll tell you that the company I'm referring to, and people who know me actually they know which company it is. I would never go back and take that time away because I learned so many ways of what not to do.
What not
And
to
so
do.
many times I was like, I will never be like that. I will never treat people like that. I'll never act like that. So
Yeah.
sometimes you have to see bad just so you know what good looks like.
Well, I was sitting here listening to that and kind of reflecting and thinking. I would tell your audience that the absolute time that you should never give anyone any feedback whatsoever is in a scenario where there has been any sort of wine, beer, alcohol consumed.
Oh,
And, I was sitting here thinking, okay, what was it? Because I've seen a few bad actors in my day. And I remember a time where there was an offsite that took place and we had dinner as a team and couple of cocktails were consumed during that dinner. And then we resumed work, which is also not a great thing to do after the dinner. And look, it got very heated. There was screaming and yelling, and it was super toxic. And so, it kind of goes back to the golden rule, man. I don't want to work in a toxic environment. No one wants to work in a toxic environment. They want to work in a company, in an atmosphere where, difficult conversations can take place, but they know that their best intentions are in mind, right? And in this case, the person that was on the receiving end of what was a really terrible tongue lashing, I give that person a lot of credit because I'm not so sure that I could have sat there and received it the way that he did.
Yeah, man. Yeah, you're so right. For those listening, especially if you're an associate or a rep, because I've on the Instagram channel, I love that Instagram channel, All Hail Medical Sales, just because it's like my direct phone line to like all these reps. And I hear a lot of these stories. If you're a rep or associate and you dealt with something that Joseph just shared, if you were like brutally insulted, it's toxic. I want you to personally reach out to me. I will help you get out of that company. I might regret what I just said, but like, no, like it's so bad. There's a lot of talented people who never realize their talent because they had a shitty boss,
Yeah.
and they carry
Life,
that with them.
life is too short, man, to accept bad
Way too
leadership,
short.
you know?
100%, man. 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I think we covered the feedback section pretty damn well. I mean, what do you think?
I think so too.
All right, let's round the corner. Step 4 and 5. What's step 4?
Yeah, well, it's really step 4 is really where you have to get out there and show them what good looks like. You have to be as close to an expert in whatever it is you're giving feedback on as possible, so that you can course correct and show them the absolute way forward. And so, sort of back to the executive presentation example that I was talking about earlier, the reason that I was able to give him the coaching that I was because I had done that presentation 1,000 times before and had sold numerous deals, and it worked. And I knew the inflection points, and I knew what to hone in on. I knew how to read the room. And so I was able to show him what good looked like. And then the 5th step was, here again, now we're talking about it again, right? We're talking about what was just displayed, if you will. What were the lessons learned? And now I want to see it again. I want to see you do it again and see if you took the coaching and the feedback and if you've honed your craft. And we'll stay at that as long as somebody needs me to continue to help them, as long as there is a commitment there.
Yeah. And I think, you were mentioning that in this, and your 5th step is just to kind of constantly rinse, wash, and repeat this process, right? Over and over. Correct?
Correct.
So I'm going to ask you, this is you had this framework, but you had mentioned at the beginning of the show that you might reorder some of these, where you might say that you show or demo it to somebody earlier, correct? So the 5 steps you go through, which is like, one is identify and talk through like a SWOT or a gap analysis. 2nd step is observing, what they do and how they do it. 3rd step is to give that feedback. 4th step is showing them what good looks like. And the 5th step is rinse, wash, and repeat that. Would you say that it might be better to move that step 4 to be after you do that SWOT analysis and everything, you identify those areas of weakness, that you show them what good looks like? Or do you feel like it's important to observe them first to identify those areas of weakness? And now we're kind of splitting hairs here, but I'm wondering.
And the reason that I said that you could move those 2 things around is I think it really depends on the type of and level of training that you give folks, what their background and experience is, how many times maybe they've done it before. There are a number of different factors there. So yeah, I think you could certainly move those things around. And I'm a big fan of training people in the appropriate manner. I can't ask somebody to go out and do something in the right way if they haven't been trained appropriately. That's unfair. So I think it's definitely something you've got to consider in the moment. Hey, do I need to go show them because maybe they weren't trained appropriately, or maybe they have never been in that situation before? So yes, I'm perfectly fine with moving those steps, but it's similar to a deal. I don't care if you get in front of the physicians first or if you get in front of the executives first. It doesn't matter. But in today's environment, you're going to need to be touching both of those people to get something accomplished in a hospital setting.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think like probably the biggest thing here is just like the need for sort of observing and like sort of looking into like the specifics of how you do things. For me, we've spoken about them, but like one of my partners for the show is Clary, and one of the reasons why I like them a lot is that they help automate a lot of the data that goes into Salesforce, so that you can sort of look very granularly to see like, oh, you know what, these deals have not moved forward because these steps haven't been completed, or you haven't had enough touches on them, etc. I think on the sales presentation side, something that our industry doesn't do, and I've told reps like to start doing it on their own, if anything, which is on the Zoom calls when you present to a physician, because most of demos and these meetings are happening through Zoom first. Record the calls and watch them afterwards. I think it's like for me, last year I did 145 or 148 sales calls for my course, just at the very beginning to sell hand-to-hand selling. And I watched all 140 whatever, videos of me. It's not fun. I'll tell you that every week. I'm not in the mood to go watch a video of myself, but that's the only way that you can see like, oh, you know what? I said this the wrong way. I could have phrased this better,
For sure. And I think part of this is too, Omar, is it doesn't have to be step 1, step 2, step 3, where those steps are absolutely being completed in their entirety. It could be if you're in a Zoom call with someone and they're presenting. To be a good leader, sometimes you have to step in and save people. And you have to say, hey, let's pause for a second and let's talk about this area. And you sort of take control back at that point and then show what good looks like in that moment. And then you can talk about that once the call is over with. So it doesn't have to be exactly where one step is completed before you do the next. It can be very fluid. Discovery is a great way, if a rep and a manager, or a manager and a director, or a director and a VP are in a meeting with someone and there's a discovery process that's unfolding. Maybe you let the junior person that is in need of the coaching and development try to kick things off, right? And ease into some of those discussions. And then maybe that's when you step in, the person who has a little bit more tenure, who knows what questions to really ask, and you coach on the fly. You start to ask really more thoughtful questions that the person that's sitting next to you can pick up on and observe. And so I think that a lot of this can be done on the fly. It doesn't have to be so stepwise.
No, I personally, I agree with you. I think like when I look at the SaaS world, SaaS does a great job because, SaaS is very much led from the engineering and product side. And so you see that in their sales process. It's the frameworks, the processes are very, very tight. That being said, sometimes I feel like that's what a lot of people in SaaS sales do, right? Where it becomes way more science than art, right? And there's like very little discovery process. And I think that's just one thing that like you and I have talked about, the importance of like really good discovery, because in that discovery process, you might realize that like, I don't know, I'm making this up, but if it's like a 7-step presentation, 3 out of those 7 steps you don't need to talk about because it's like meaningless and not important to whoever you're presenting to. They don't care. It's just like, why even talk about it? And it took me a while, like as a salesperson myself, in my own company, to realize that when a prospect in discovery tells you what they're interested in and what's important to them, you should just talk about that. You don't waste time talking about all the other things and features because like it's just fluff and they don't care about it. I think it just takes a lot of discipline to do that. Do you feel like that's the thing about like what does it take? This might take longer than this. Probably is like another episode we should do, but just at a high level, what do you think it takes to formulate a good discovery?
I think here again, it takes actually giving a damn about who you're sitting across the table from. And so if all you care about is yourself in the equation, you're never going to ask good discovery questions. You're never going to think of good discovery questions to ask. What
does that mean? Like, what do you mean by like, you have to give it? I know what you mean, but like, what do you mean by you have to give a damn about the person that you're selling to? Why?
Well, I think that people are all too often just transparent to a fault, where it's like, tell me the last time you used a particular product. Well, all you care about is to get an answer that allows you to formulate a response that positions your product against what they've been using, right? Whereas I think really asking them what's important to them, what are the challenges that they're up against on a daily basis, and even probably before that, getting online. And I've heard you talk about this in the past. Have they published papers? What is their educational experience, or what is their leadership experience? Have they been in the news recently? Have they been published? Really doing a deep dive into those people that you're going to go and meet with. And to me, that's like being really intellectually curious. And then once you get into the discussion, it's like, hey, I read this about you. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. That's a lot different than, when was the last time you used this suture or stapler? Oh, well, let me tell you how mine's better. That's just so transparent that all you care about is the sale. Whereas if you really care about people, you will have done the research beforehand, and then you can get into a good dialogue and have, a person to person discussion that might lead to a solution that you can bring to their needs or their challenges. But all too
Absolutely.
often, it's just about me, my product. We talked about this with presentations. I want to get through my slide deck. If it's the last thing in the world, I'm going to get to my last slide. And I don't care if you're giving me all the verbal and visual cues that I need to just stop and talk about things. I'm going to get through my presentation. And bringing that back to where we are with coaching, if all you care about is making your point, driving your point home, and you don't really care about the person on the other side, you're never going to be able to have this process stick.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I completely agree, and I think, I think it's a combination of like, I mean, look, some of the greats like Zig Ziglar. I mean, he was right, which is like, not only being empathetic, but like it's kind of like, if you, what he used to say is like, if you help enough people get what they want, like you'll ultimately get what you want. And I think that like, great discovery involves having this interesting conversation, let's say with a surgeon or physician, about like what are their like real clinical interests? Like what kind of practice are they trying to build? What kind of legacy are they interested in? Are they interested in becoming like big and being on podium? Are they more interested on the tech side? Because then it kind of like gives you clues as to, oh, these are the levers I can pull, right? And then when you pull those levers, they know that you're persuading them, but it's okay because everybody's on board with that. By
It's
the way,
with them and
and I need to do. I'm gonna do. I should actually. I'll do this with your team next week. But I should do some training at some point. But if salespeople know how to engineer a prompt with ChatGPT, you can tell it to look up a certain physician and go in through PubMed and pull the research papers and figure out what was cited the most, all these things, and tell ChatGPT, be like the world's greatest medical salesperson, what are like 3 or 5 really good questions I can talk to, and it'll come up with them. So there's ways to get better, but you have to want to be better, right?
That is so awesome. And I'll tell you, I've got a funny story that I'd probably only tell on a podcast like this. And
perfect. This is the best way to wrap up. Let's hear it.
And it's so applicable to what we've been talking about here. So I've mentioned to you the name Andy Sale in the past, and at some point you've got to have Andy on. He's a great human being. He's a great salesperson. He is a great mentor and coach. He's just a great person all around. And I think the world of him. So in 2000 and 2007, Andy became my manager. He was the one that got me to Intuitive. He was responsible for getting me there. And we had an amazing year together. He was going to be director of the year. I was going to be rep of the year. And we're coming down to the wire. We're in the month of December. And I think I shared with you on the other podcast that my family and I had gone through Hurricane Katrina right as I was getting married, right around the time my career was getting going. And so I lost everything in Hurricane Katrina, everything. And didn't have a suit, didn't have shirts, didn't have shoes, nothing. And so when I got to Intuitive, I had to go buy my suits at like Target, which nothing against that, but the suits that I bought were like paper bags. Well, Andy had not ever seen me in this particular suit before. We're showing up to what was at that time the meeting that was going to push us over the edge. We were going to sell our second robot to this one particular hospital in the same calendar year. The CEO, the CFO, legal counsel, they were all going to be there. This was going to be the moment of the year that was going to make us President's Club winners. I show up in this particular suit, Omar, that I don't know, looked like a paper bag that had stripes on it. It was brown. It was terrible looking. And we're walking in and he says, "What are you wearing? What is this that you're wearing? I don't get it. I've never seen you in this before." Like he was shocked visibly. And he said, "Man, it's too late now for you to go change, but otherwise I would probably tell you to go change. It's that appalling." So we walk into the meeting and I get up to stand in front of this entire executive team, and I'm getting ready to give an ROI presentation on why they should invest in their second robot. And I'm maybe one slide in, and Andy, in front of the entire room, says, "Hey, time out, time out." He says, "Is anyone going to say something about what he's wearing right now?" And the whole room busts out into laughter. Okay. And the CEO looks at him and says, "I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was wondering, where he got that outfit from and why he was wearing that on this day. I've seen him in other outfits. Why was he wearing this suit on this big of a day?" And it was enough of an icebreaker, and it was enough of sort of a redirect of everybody's attention, got them excited and in the mood and laughing. And we walked out of there with a purchase order in hand, and we both went on to win President's Club. But the point of the story was that was a coaching moment. And so I left that and went and saw a tailor and bought a nice suit that I could be presentable in front of executives with going forward. But Andy had a different way of sort of giving me that feedback in front of everybody in the moment, right then and there. And of course, he was dressed to the nines, so he was showing me what good looked like. And so it's always stuck with me. There are different ways to give feedback, and sometimes humor is one of those things that works really well.
That is amazing. I'm so happy you shared that, sir. That is, I have this show literally to hear stories like that. That is just amazing.
But I wish I could find a picture of that suit. It was terrible. My God.
Do you have that suit somewhere? You must.
No,
you probably burned it. You burned it
at a burning party.
Man, just note on that. There's something to be said about how you show up and present yourself. I know people are just like, there's a saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Everybody judges books by their cover, and you should look like you give a damn. And I'm specifically talking to the people who live in California, specifically Silicon Valley. Please look like you give a damn. Look like you care. Okay. I know it's casual, it's cool, but like, if you're going to go to a meeting, like, just look like you give a damn, please. Like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea how else to say it. I'm trying not to curse on this show, but I'm just like, look like you give a damn. Look like you give a damn. Well,
Andy's coaching was always, having that equal business stature. And that was a big thing for him. Right. And so to your point, it's like, if you're going to take the time and energy to go meet with people that you really care about, and if it's super important that you get your product in there, you've got to be presentable. You got to match the hatch, as they say in fly fishing. You've got to show up looking like you care about earning those people's business.
Damn straight. A long time when I was in the Valley, I went to some, God, I don't even know what kind of meeting it was, but like it was some networking event or something, but there was other med device people there. So I showed up like, dressed to the nines, and like some guy like kind of joked with me, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, and this is like my previous company, like it was right after I left Missouri, and somebody's like, "Oh man," he's like, you're kind of like overdressed, for Silicon Valley here. And I looked at him, I'm like, I'm not bringing myself to your guys' level. I was like, you can bring yourself to my level. I was like, I'm not lowering myself to your level. But it's just true, man. It's, it's just true. There's just something to be said about, there's these subtle things in business that like the real ones know, Game recognizes game, right?
For sure. Exactly, man.
Awesome. Joseph, look, man, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I know we're going to do more of these, but it's always an honor and pleasure to hang out and chat with you. And, you're getting more active on LinkedIn, so I know people can find you on there,
For sure.
So,
well, look, it's always great to come on, Omar. I think you cover a wide range of really interesting topics. You've got great guests. And, from the bottom of my heart, man, I really appreciate some of the things that you've brought to light that hopefully now I can go, train my team on after next week. Let's see if we can find another way to work together, because I think what you talk about is important. All the topics that you're bringing forward.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Well, that's another episode of the State of MedTech. Be sure to give Joseph a follow. And then be sure, again, I don't want to remind you guys again about this, but if you've been following this show and you have not given it a 5-star review, shame on you, but it's okay. I still love you. So give us a 5-star review, write a review. If you're on Apple, write that review. It's very important. And if you're a rep or you're part of the Red Hat Gang, you follow us on Instagram, make sure you subscribe to the show, because there are certain Easter egg, aka special hidden episodes that I publish. I do not promote them. You can find them if you look for the eye emoji symbol. Those are very secretive episodes. You only get those notifications if you subscribe. So click that subscribe button on the podcast, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has a executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.